One of the troubling parts of Parshas Vayetze is Rachel stealing those terafim. The holy, holy Rachel Imeinu stealing the terafim. It bothers me. I hope does it bother you as well? Okay, good. So we have something we can share. Okay. Rashi says the reason why Rachel stole her father's terafim, her father's idols, was because she wanted to save her father from having avodah zarah in his house. That seems to be the most common way that we would, if our children said, "Why did Rachel steal?" You're not allowed to steal someone else's things. So we would say because this was avodah zarah, it was idolatry, and Rachel wanted to save her father from avodah zarah. So you know, and we tell our children the famous story about Avraham. You know, when Terach, who was an idol salesman, he had an idol showroom, and the famous midrash, which says that Avraham smashed all the smaller idols and left only one big idol standing, in order to teach his father a lesson that idols are inanimate, and so therefore it's ridiculous to try and worship them. And so, of course, you'll always get one kid in the audience who will say, "But how can you destroy someone else's property? That's wrong." So, of course, you have to say, when it comes to avodah zarah, there's a mitzvah to destroy avodah zarah, even when it's not yours, even if it belongs to somebody else. And so therefore Rachel steals the terafim. Ostensibly the reason seems to be, like Rashi says, is because she wanted to remove avodah zarah from her father's house. She still loved her father. She still she cared about her father's neshama, of course, and she wanted to make sure that her father would try to move on with his life without the terafim. But there seems to be a deeper reason having to do with these terafim. These terafim were not just an avodah zarah. The Medrash seems to relate that there was a series of kishuf procedures that you could do with these terafim that would give you magical knowledge. If you take a look at the bottom of your sheet from Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer, which is also echoed in Targum Yonatan, but it's easier in Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer because Targum Yonatan is in Aramaic and Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer is in Hebrew. It says, Hishkim Lavan baboker, that Lavan awoke in the morning after, Yaakov takes his whole family and sneaks out in the cover of night, and they all leave with a huge amount of cattle and livestock, or sheep, and with all of the kinderlach and all of the wives. It says, V'ra'es kol asher li Yaakov, ve'amar kol elu nishali. So Lavan wakes up in the morning after catching up with Yaakov, and he sees this entire camp of Yaakov and his family, and he says, all of this is mine. So So then he reproaches Yaakov and he says to him, now that you've taken everything that's mine, did you have to take my terafim as well? These are the idols that I used to, I bowed down to them. This give me some comfort, and you took everything else from me. Umahem ha-terafim. So the Medrash asks, what are these terafim? What was their power? Shochetino son bechor, that in front of the terafim people would slaughter a firstborn animal. Umolkines rosho, then they would salt its head. Umolchinoso b'melach, and then further preserve it in salt. Uvashemen tov, and then in some kind of fine oil. V'kosfen al tas zahav shem ruach tum'ah, and then they would write down on some kind of gold foil. You would write down the name of some kind of demonic spirit. Umenichin oso bikar, then you would place all of these things, the head of the firstborn and the gold foil, place it on a tray or some kind of cushion in front of the terafim. Umadlikin neros lefanov, and then you would light candles in front of this idol. Umishtachavin lo, and then you would bow down to it. And as a result of this kind of mystical or magical practice, v'hu medaber imahem, the terafim, this idol, would then communicate, would speak, would actually become animate and would speak to you. Uminayin shahaterafim medabrim shenemar ki haterafim dibru aven. And as it says in the scripture, that the terafim speak offensively, and lefichach genovasam Rachel, and that's why Rachel stole the terafim. Why? Shelo yagidu lelavan shebarach Yaakov. so that the Terafim would not be able to squeal. And because Lavan would, sort of like the mirror, mirror on the wall kind of story. In other words, instead of the magical mirror, Lavan had the magical Terafim, and he would be able to do through this occult practice of burning the fire and the firstborn and all of these other things, he would be able to say to the Terafim, say, where did Yaakov go? Where is he? And the Terafim would tell him, and that would cause Lavan to be able to catch up. And so, in order to avoid that from happening, Rachel stole the Terafim. So this was sort of like a magical GPS, these Terafim. And Rachel didn't want Lavan to have that. But that really begs the question. The question that I have is, if Rachel didn't want Lavan to have the Terafim because they had this magic GPS quality, why didn't he then just break them, destroy them, ground them to powder, destroy them? Why does she have to schlep them with her and hide them away, it seems like she's trying to preserve them, seems like she's trying to harbor them. Yeah?
Another problem in that she seems to believe in Avodah Zarah. If she believes they have magical power, then she believes...
What's wrong with believing in magical power? You're alluding to a famous debate between the Ramban and the Rambam, but the Ramban clearly states that when the Torah prohibits you from practicing certain occult practices, it's not because these things are nonsensical, but it is rather because these things actually do have power. There are magical forces, there are supernatural occult forces that exist within the universe, and a person can channel those forces if he knows the proper recipe. And so these recipes did exist. There were people who were sorcerers and witches, and who were able to do necromancy and summon up the dead and perform all kinds of form of witchcraft, and could do it quite successfully. And so it's not surprising that Rachel believed in it, because it was a reality back then, according to most commentaries. So she didn't want her father to have access to it. She wanted to save her husband. But again, the question is, why didn't she just destroy the idols? So that's the question that I have, and I have an answer, but I don't know necessarily that my answer is correct. But perhaps you'll think about it and you'll let me know what you think. My conclusion is that Rachel saw a value in keeping the Terafim for herself. And ultimately, she might have wanted to use these Terafim for some future event to protect themselves on the road. I mean, after all, think about it. Where were they headed? Where were they going now that they left Lavan's house? Where were they headed? To Canaan, back to the land of Canaan. And who were they going to encounter in the land of Canaan? Esav. It's next week's Parsha. So it's pretty helpful to have a magical GPS to know where Esav is going, isn't it? If you're worried about this encounter between an Esav who has sworn to murder you and your entire family when he meets you, it'd be pretty helpful to have this magical power at your disposal. To be able to avoid where he's going. There's something very interesting, and that is that there are certain alliterative devices that the Torah uses in a number of interesting places. For example, at the beginning in Parshas Bereshis, it says, "Vayiyu shnehem arumim ha'adam v'isho v'lo yitbo shashu." It says that the man and his wife, the Adam and his wife, were arumim, which means unclothed. And they were unashamed. But the very next pasuk says, "V'hanachash haya arum." The nachash was arum, which means he was cunning. So clearly, even though the words mean two different things based on the context, there is this alliteration that is used to tell me that there's a connection between the unclothed nature of Adam and Chava before the sin and the arum nature of the nachash as he was causing them to lose their innocence. Yes? So I think you can find the same thing over here. If you take a look at the text, take a look at Pasuk Yud Tes. It says, in your sheet, it says, V'Lavan halach ligzoz es tzono, that Lavan went to shear his sheep, and while he's out in the pasture, Vatignov Rachel es haterafim asher le'aviha. That Rachel at that point steals the terafim that belonged to her father. And then right afterwards, the pasuk says, "Vayignov Yaakov esleiv Lavan ha'arami al belihi gilo ki vareachu." That Yaakov steals the heart of Lavan the Aramean by not telling him that he was fleeing, by not telling him that he was departing. Now, is this merely coincidence that the same word is used? Lavan and Rachel and Yaakov are doing two totally different things to Lavan. Rachel is stealing his terafim. She's actually doing an act of geneva. She's stealing. What does Yaakov do? Yaakov is merely deceiving Lavan by doing a passive act of just not telling him that, hey, I'm leaving, goodbye. And the Torah seems to put them together for a reason. It seems to tell us that there's a connection between Rachel's objective and Yaakov's objective. Rachel's act of stealing the terafim in some way is directly related to Yaakov's decision to deceive Lavan by telling him we're leaving. And I think both of them were preparations for Esav. Yaakov needed to go through 20 years of living with Lavan, and finally having this ultimate confrontation of standing up to Lavan and doing that which was very unsavory to Yaakov. It was something that it caused him, I'm sure, initially at the prospect of having to do something that had the appearance of being not totally kosher, made him very, very uncomfortable with it, which is basically to say, number one, you owe me for 20 years of labor, because, upright people don't like to take things from other people, but this was compensation. And number two, having to finagle with someone who you know is deceptive and have to anticipate their deceptiveness by doing things that are in some way deceptive. But that's really what the pasuk says, Im navar titavar, that sometimes imikesh titapol, you have to sometimes, if you're dealing with a person who's crooked, you have to use cunning in order to circumvent their crookedness. If you know that the person is bent on cheating you, you have to anticipate the cheat and make sure that you don't allow yourself to get swindled. So that is really what Yaakov is doing, is that he is, in a way, the reason why he left under the cover of night and didn't tell Laban that he was leaving is because he knew that Laban would find some pretense to make sure that he stayed, and certainly not take all the livestock that he had legitimately bargained for with his father-in-law. And both the action of Rachel and the action of Yaakov are both preparations for the final confrontation with Esav. The reason is that Esav is characterized as the ultimate personification of the Yetzer Hara, the Satan, and Yaakov needs to go through 20 years of living with Lavan to be able to know how to deal with an Esav. And that's really, this was Yaakov Avinu's training ground in order to have this ultimate confrontation with Esav. And you know that when Yaakov finally does meet up with Esav, he also is able to use a communicative method that is less than 100% honest. Because what happens? Esav says, come, let's travel together. And let's go. We're going in the same direction. And Yaakov tells him, well, I'm not going all the way to that distance, but Esav says, that's okay, we'll go, however far you're going, we'll go together. And Yaakov says, well, you know that Hayeladim Rakim, that the children are young, and I have so much livestock, we'll never be able to keep up with you. You better go ahead, and we'll catch up with you later. And ultimately, Yaakov never catches up with Esav. This type of certain a necessity creates this spirit within Yaakov to be less than totally forthcoming with information. And this was totally against what Yaakov's nature was. Yaakov was as straight as an arrow. He was an Ishtam Yoshev al Halim. He used to sit in the tents and was very tamimistic. He was very straight, very honest. And he needed to be able to learn how to deal with people in the outside world who are not honest. And sometimes, as unsavory and undesirable as that is, when you're dealing with people who are dishonest and really want to exploit you and take advantage of you, you have to know how to communicate in a less than forthcoming way. That's why the Torah tells us this whole story. So Rachel's act of stealing the terafim was as much of a preparation for the confrontation with Esav as was Yaakov's stealing, this act of what we would call deceptiveness, or not doing that which Lavan expected him to do, which was to tell him, say goodbye, I'm taking all my family with me, was done out of necessity, because when you're dealing with a Ramai, when you're dealing with someone like Lavan, you have to be able to extricate yourself from him by doing things that you know that you really don't want to do, but are necessary for your own survival. Now, with that being the case, I think there's a certain irony. It's a sad irony, because Yaakov's Geneva was a successful act. In other words, it resulted in Yaakov's ability to confront Esav successfully. He was able to mask his true emotions. He created peace with Esav, and he was able to move forward with his life and avoid this terrible conflict with Esav. Unfortunately, Rachel's Geneva was unnecessary, and it resulted in the final analysis with a tragic death, her own death, because Yaakov, not realizing that Rachel had stolen the teraphim, said, "Whoever has stolen these teraphim shall not live." And that's why ultimately Chazal say that Rachel died on the way to Efrat, and by Kever Rachel in Beit Lechem, is because of the curse of Yaakov, because he didn't realize what was going on. And we'd have to in some way try and understand why Yaakov's efforts to confront Esav were successful and Rachel's efforts to confront Esav were never utilized, never came to fruition, and resulted in her death. One way is because it could be that Yaakov didn't actually resort to actual theft. One is because all Yaakov did was not tell Lavan that he was leaving. So there was a certain deception involved, but it's perfectly fine to deceive the deceiver. But it's never okay to steal from a ganav. In other words, there are certain things that I certainly shouldn't do, even if I'm dealing with a deceptive person. And perhaps that's one of the lessons that we're supposed to learn, is that while it's acceptable and sometimes necessary to lower yourself to a certain level in order to be able to deal effectively with the outside world who really is bent on messing you up, you have to know what your limits are. You have to know that there are limits. Genevas das sometimes is something that we can sanction if you're dealing with deceptive people, but actual Geneva is something that we can't sanction. Yeah.
Is the conversation Yaakov having with the wives when he tells them that they're planning to leave, saying that I didn't find fit, your father doesn't look at me as pleasantly, and they complain as well that the dowry was given for them, that he kept, he never. Isn't some conversation maybe?
Yes,
trying
this
to
is
compensate.
Yaakov tells Rachel and Leah that it's time for us to go.
But idea of compensation, you said that Yaakov took the herds as a compensation for his 22 years of work.
Right.
She might have picked up Trofim as a compensation for the dowry she never got.
Oh, I don't know. I don't know about
maybe
that.
I haven't
seen that. Maybe there is such a commentary that suggests that in defense of Rachel. I don't know.
Yeah, just comment.
Could be. Good. Okay. Yes. That she what?
That she did about a czar, if she believed that he was using it.
Well, this is well before the Torah is given. So I'm not going to touch on the subject of, look, if you have a device, it's not a Avodah Zarah in the sense that I believe in worshiping other gods. It's an act of kishuf. God says kishuf is despicable to God because you're tapping into forces that God doesn't want you to tap into. It's not because you believe you are worshiping other gods. So what Rachel was doing was resorting to an act of kishuf. It's not really Avodah Zarah in the way that the Medrash is explaining it. The teraphim was not something that Lavan davened to because he believed that this was the real God that needed to be worshipped. It was because this was the method of getting some kind of magical effect. So if Rachel viewed it that way, I don't think there's any, not that it would be permitted after the Torah is given, but before the Torah is given, I don't see a problem with it. Yes?
But wouldn't it, I mean, when she takes it, like, they're traveling, doesn't she turn to him, by the way, I took Dad's, idol. Like, it's not a conversation that they would have with each other that he wouldn't realize, that he wouldn't know, that Yaakov wouldn't know, that she took the terafim. I find that interesting.
Maybe it's precisely because Rachel knew that her husband would never approve of that.
Yeah.
She knew that my husband has limits because he's such a gutta. He's such a straight arrow. He's, I grew up with this love, and I know what he's really all about. So I feel justified in really, really taking it from him.